Well, hello and welcome everyone who is joining us today for our culinary conversation with Adan Medrano. My name is Misty Flores and I am the assistant curator for Rienzi, which is the European Decorative Arts House Museum, part of the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. And I'm joined today by award-winning author and chef Adan Medrano. Today we'll be exploring the proliferation of spices in Texas Mexican cooking and how food relates to memory, identity, and community. Adan Medrano is a food writer and chef specializing in the indigenous foods of Texas and the Americas. His book, Truly Texas Mexican, A Native Culinary Heritage in Recipes, published by Texas Tech University Press, received the finalist Book of the Year award from Forward Review. In his most recent history and cookbook, Don't Count the Tortillas, The Art of Texas Mexican Cooking, Medrano focuses on the aesthetic aspects of cooking that universally impact identity and community. He has spent 23 years throughout Latin America, Europe, and Asia, and during his travels came to recognize the cultural importance of food. He returned to the US in 2010 to focus his attention on the culinary traditions of the Mexican American, Native American communities of Texas and the indigenous cooking of the Americas. He is currently president of the Texas Indigenous Food Project. Medrano is also an award-winning filmmaker and holds a master's degree in radio, television, and film from the University of Texas at Austin. In 1976, he founded the San Antonio Cine Festival, the first and now longest running Latinx film festival in the USA. He continues producing media and with the documentary feature film currently in post-production, The Roots of Texas Mexican Food. He's lectured extensively throughout the country and last year was invited by the U.S. ambassador to Russia as the featured chef for the 4th of July U.S. official celebration. Thank you, Adan, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm excited to talk about all of the things we're going to cover today. But before we dive in, first question, how did you become interested in cooking? Did your family cook together while you were growing up? What are some of the memories that you have that relate to that?
Yes, my earliest memories actually of childhood are around food. The sense of belonging. I remember being very young. I must have been. Sometimes have these memories of even when you're 4 or 5. These images and impressions. That's at least with me. They stay with me. And I was in the corner of the kitchen. It was a cold day, and it's on the west side of San Antonio. And at those times, we used to have peddlers. They were the precursors of the trucks, the food trucks of today. They would go around, they would have fresh corn tortillas made fresh from a molino, which is a grinding mill for the corn. So these were freshly ground tortillas made, and my mother, I remember, would buy a big load of them, and she gave me, when she rolled it up, threw some water into it as though she were sprinkling fairy dust on it, and she gave it to me. They're called machitos. And I remember tasting them and just the aroma of the fresh corn, a little bit roasted. It was just one of my earliest memories. So yes, my mother was a great cook, cooked all the time. Meals were very important to our family, and I have the distinctive memory that every time we ate, and the way that my mother cooked narrated our identity. That helped me over time understand who I am. Because some of the earliest impressions from, for example, my father, he gave me a squash and he said, "Este es tatuma." This is tatuma. He used the indigenous word. He didn't say calabacita, which is the Spanish word, which is not our native language, not our mother tongue. He said, "Este es tatuma. This is tatuma," and he gave it to me. So it was a constant identification of my, indigenous roots. And then my mother also made it a point to, when you all know what a molcajete is, I brought it. So.
Oh, great. Yes, please.
Can I show the molcajete? This is my, it looks bigger. That's a
massive molcajete. That's huge. It's much bigger than the one that I grew up with and the one I have in my house. So.
The camera makes it look bigger, but she showed me this. She said, "Este es tejolote," using the indigenous name, tejolote, not pesto, not mano, which is the Spanish word, but tejolote. So, you know, from my earliest days, these are memories that stick with me, and they forge my identity.
It's wonderful. I mean, I think that food has a way of doing that for all of us, right? We have these memories tied to family that are surrounded, you know, that have to do with food and things, you know, earliest things that we can kind of remember. I know I have early memories of cooking with my grandmother and
Where
or
was that? Was that in Houston? Where was that?
yes, on the north side of Houston. So we grew up right in near north side, Irvington, Cavalcade area, and yeah, cooking, you know, boiling the meat. When we were, my favorite was barbacoa preparation. We'd be digging the big hole in the backyard and putting the cow's head inside. So, I mean, it was quite
Okay.
dramatic when you're a child, but it was, you know, one of those things that, you know, you were very excited about. You just put the head in and you let it cook for hours and hours. And, you know, what came at the end of it was one of the best things. You know, it was always something to look forward to, very special occasions, but
Amazing. You did that. We did that too. In fact,
really.
my new film, by the way, it's not in post-production anymore. It's finished.
Oh,
It's now
wonderful.
totally finished. We had original music by some wonderful musicians, and one of the main scenes is this barbacoa that you mentioned, where the cow's head is put in the hole with spices.
Mhm.
That's the true barbacoa. That is
Yeah, absolutely.
Mexican, indigenous. And if you go to San Antonio or around this area,
Mhm.
we are told by archaeologists that in Houston, for example, you cannot walk 100 yards without stepping onto what was formerly an earth oven. Earth oven technology was very widespread in Houston, in the area. The Karankawas, the Tonkawas used to live here. So it's great that you're still doing it. It's amazing because we do it too.
It's I live in an apartment now, so I can't go dig a hole and put a cow's head in the middle and cook in the yard. But you know, but yeah, those are, you know, some early things that I remember, you know, growing up. Food, you know, was always the connection. So let's, you know, let us set the scene a little bit as to the why of our conversation today. Particularly as it relates to Rienzi. Now, the Rienzi collection is the result of the life works of our patrons, Harris and Carol Masterson, who left us a wonderful house and collection full of European decorative arts that reflected their interest in England and France and Italy and Germany. But what a lot of people may not know is that Carol Masterson and her children lived in Mexico City for several years. They had a great love and affinity for Mexico, the culture, the food. And there is a special room in the house that's affectionately known as the Mexican room that reflects the special place that Mexico held for them. And the objects that are in that space are things that the family collected throughout their lifetime, as well as things the museums continue to add since the house became part of the MFAH, featuring objects from Mexico, Spain, Guatemala. I find it a deeply personal room, and I think that it's a unique thread within our story. Now, what more people may know about is that we talk about food and spices a lot at Rienzi. That's a bit more well known. We have historic dinners that are focused on food history. And we have objects, a number of objects in the collection that were used in the past for spices, such as salts, nutmeg graters, and spice boxes. One object in particular is a silver spice box made in Spain in the 18th century. Made to hold pepper, salt, and nutmeg. There's a nutmeg grater that's it's hidden right inside the middle of it. Spices, as you know, were a precious commodity during this time. It's not like you could simply pop over to the nearest grocery store and grab what you needed. These were things that had to be imported or exported out. And the fact that the box is made out of expensive silver, I think, further illustrates the value that was placed on these wares, on these ingredients. And their proliferation worldwide, I think, is reflective of the imperial ambitions of various countries, like Spain, which is relevant to our region. And of course, all of the horrors that were tied to the cultivating and transportation of these spices, those narratives that surround that. Now, your work focuses on the cuisine that evolved in this region in South and Central Texas, as well as Northeastern Mexico, before the arrival of the Spanish, during the Viceregal period, and after, and the way in which indigenous communities created a unique cuisine through the combinations of native and European ingredients. So what roles have spices played within the history of the region? And as a result, how has the cuisine evolved over time?
Thanks that's a large question. And I think it's an important question because it focuses on this region. Most worldviews of food writers in the past 20 to 30 years, the worldview has been that the Mexican food of Texas and northeastern Mexico is all food that comes south of the Rio Grande. There's this mindset that Texas and the US exist here, there's a river, and Mexico exists over here. And that we in Texas took food from across the river, brought it over, and then processed it and made it more to the liking of Texans and US Americans. That's the worldview. And once we start reading more about history, and now more writers and editors are really making use of archaeology, of archaeologists. We make use of archaeologists from Texas A&M University and others connected with the University of Texas for the work that we do, including the film. And the short answer to your question is that this change of worldview means that we are looking at one region, which is a cohesive region. It's cohesive culturally, it's cohesive in culinary terms. And it's like a triangle. It goes, if you were to start around maybe Waco, a little bit south of Houston, Waco, go all the way down, it's a triangle, then go all the way west to Del Rio, and then come down to Monterrey, and then go all the way to the coast and up again, you have a triangle. That's the Texas-Mexican triangle. And historically, we know that that was a cohesive region. It was called the Coahuiltecan region. And in fact, when in 1821-24, the Republic of Mexico claimed it as part of the Republic of Mexico, and it was called the state of Coahuila y Texas. And so that's an important region, and we move from that region then to talk about spices. To me, spices are like these heavenly grace, that fall because they're so aromatic. They make food really delicious, and they were very difficult to get. That's why the Europeans ended up meeting with us here in the Americas, because they were really trying to get to India to get black pepper and all the other spices. And they ran into our spices, which are chiles and all of the native spices, natives to this region. And that's what I write about. The spices that are not from Mexico, Central and Southern Mexico, which is usually what people have in mind. I write about the indigenous food of Texas. Keep in mind that Texas is an indigenous name. Texas is the name of the Caro Indians that are just by Nacogdoches. If you take a 2-hour drive, it's a beautiful site. It's a Texas Historical Commission museum, and it's worth for Houstonians to take a ride. But to make this already long story short, I want to mention that because it is an indigenous story. Most of the places, if you look at the places of Mexico, we talk about the Mexican cuisine. There's really not just one. There are many. There's the Oaxaca, Coahuila, and every region has an indigenous root that then accepts the European dimensions. And the Texas Mexican region is just another one. You have Oaxaca Mexican, Puebla Mexican, Veracruz Mexican, and Texas Mexican. We're simply another region that was communicating with each other. And the spices just make it more beautiful. I hope we can talk about specific spices. That would be nice.
Well, to that, one of the, you refer to in one of the talks recently that I caught, you refer to this trinity of spices of garlic, cumin, and pepper. Can you talk a bit about those spices and the roles that they play within the identity of cooking in this region?
Thank you. Yes. If you look at chiles, chiles are very aromatic and they're very complex in their taste. The misunderstanding of chiles is that they're for heat. And that's certainly a central, dimension to that. But that is a very narrow understanding of what a chile is. A chile exists. It can be used as a spice as well because they all have different aromas and different flavors. So the trinity of spices is a layer that the indigenous peoples put upon the mixtures of chiles. And the layer that is really famous and unique to the Texas-Mexican region is, as you said, I call the trinity, the Mexican-American trinity, and cumin, garlic, and black pepper. The traveler who goes from Houston to San Antonio, South Texas, Nuevo León, Saltillo, all the way to Monterrey will encounter this in homes. But once you get past that region and you get to central Mexico, southern Mexico, Chiapas, it doesn't exist. This is unique to the Mexican-American community of Texas and northeastern Mexico. Because, and it has an interesting history. First of all, I wish I could have odor aroma on this broadcast because I would put together, I would crush, and you crush them in a molcajete, which is why I brought this,
Mm-hmm.
You put the black pepper, cumin, and garlic, and and this unique, you have to, the quantities have to be just right, which is the true with all spices. What happens when you ingest these, if you taste just with your tongue, you won't get all of the flavors. If you close up your nose, you will have only 4 tastes. There are only 4 tastes, the bitter, taste, salty, and sweet. Well, umami is the 5th taste. So you have to actually smell it. When you ingest it, your breathing puts it back to your nostrils, and that's where you collect the thousands of beautiful tastes and flavors that you have. It's only through smell and the process back here that you're creating this. So these 3, when you breathe them in, that's what creates this complex of flavors. And it's an interesting way that this people in this region of Texas, Mexico, created this unique spice, but it evolved over time. Cookbooks are really great. And when I was at the Rienzi house, and you took me to the Mexican room, mm-hmm. and I saw the spice
box, the
spice box, which is amazing. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, they have some cookbooks throughout the house. I think cookbooks are very interesting because your museum can show how cooking evolved. Our Trinity of Spices was originally in the clove, more Indian Asian dimension, mm-hmm. because the Arabs came, the Arabic influence arrived with Spain, and so I have a recipe from a 1946 cookbook by a lady her name is Josefina Velázquez de León, and she has regional platillos mexicanos, and one of them is from Tamaulipas, which is Brownsville, really. Mm-hmm. And she says this is cheese enchiladas Tamaulipas style, which is also Texas, because Tamaulipas borders Brownsville. Mm-hmm. And it's exactly the way, this is 1946, this is exactly the way that we make our enchiladas. With the same spices, the same chiles, except for the Trinity. She has garlic, black pepper, and cloves. That beautiful. And I'm going to now start cooking like with that variation, because it's very interesting. But over time, then cumin becomes more important, and then it takes over. It is no longer cloves for us; it's cumin. Mm-hmm. So I think Rienzi, I'd love to cook over there and see and serve both. Because the spices, just that odor of the clove, it would be very interesting to smell and taste the 2 different recipes. The earlier one with the cloves and the evolved one, which we use now with the cumin.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that was the one, that I grew up with, cumin, comino, like in everything. Actually, for years, I didn't know when I was younger that comino and cumin were the same thing, because I learned it in Spanish. I learned comino. So the first time my grandmother sent me to the store to go get some, I was looking for the comino and I couldn't find it anywhere. And so someone had to tell me, like, oh, you're looking for the cumin. But these are things that are, and of course I have like huge jars in my house of it because I use it for everything. But it is interesting, this combination of these spices that are imported in, and then they become part of the food narrative within the context of this region, you know, the Europeans coming in and their influence meshing with the indigenous influence and the things that come out of that. Your books, your writings, it's, you know, as a Texas Mexican, a lot of what you say resonates and to my childhood and my experience, you know, growing up in this area. One of the things though you refer to, you talk about this harmony of spices that resulted from these exchanges between the Europeans and the indigenous. Can you give an example of a dish that illustrates these harmony of spices coming together?
Well, we can move on and continue talking about the trinity of spices, because if we continue with the cheese enchiladas, it is that harmony of spices that makes the flavor unique to us. The cheese enchiladas that are traditional to us are the tortilla infused in this special combination of spices. That's what an enchilada is. An enchilada is not a casserole with cheese and all kinds of stuff. Enchilada means chilified or infused with chile. It's the past participle of the verb enchilar, which means to infuse with chile. So you take a tortilla, you dip it into the spice herb mixture, and it's an enchilada. Then you can eat it just like that. That is an enchilada. And you can have a dry enchilada where you, instead of dipping the tortilla into a sauce, you make the masa and you pour the sauce into the masa, and then you cook the tortilla, which comes out red. And that's also an enchilada. It's a tortilla that has been infused with chile. And the nice thing about thinking about this unity from differences is that, unfortunately, the history of our food is one of dispossession. When the Europeans arrive, it is not simply a matter of, look at these native ingredients, look at these foreign ingredients, let's put them together and make beauty. That is not what happened. What happened was that the local people were dispossessed, they were killed, their lands were taken away. And from the remnants of what the Europeans discarded, that is where our cuisine evolves. It is not a cuisine that simply has a marriage of two beautiful cultures. No, it is a frightening, horrible, wartime situation in which this area of the world lived. So that's why I say, when you take this molcajete and you grind it, to me this is the metaphor for our food and for our community in Houston and in Texas and Mexico. That is, you do have a blending, a hitting, a pasting. Each of these ingredients is different and they do become one. But they only become one because when you are doing this, you understand and respect the differences and the character of each one. Otherwise, it's just a mishmash. And for example, barbacoa that we were talking about earlier, you know, it's a beautiful dish. It's a delicacy now, but that's all we could have. The owners of the ranch threw away cola, tail, and the head. They threw it away. So that is all we had to eat. This is cuisine that arises from poverty and dispossession. And with this, we have beautiful history worldwide. This is not unique to Houston or to Texas. If you think of the, if you think of the cucina povera of the Italians, the poor man's kitchen, the Italian also rises from the poor people's food. French cooking, and country cooking is also poor people's cooking. The coq au vin, which is this delicacy, is poor people's cooking. So we share that in our region. We share that with other peoples of the world, that poor people's cuisine is born out of the power that poor people have. We think poor people have no agency, that they're just there. But what has happened through history in the culinary world is, out of this cabeza, which was thrown away because nobody could eat it, it's not usable, we have created a beautiful dish because creative cooks understood that with spices and with herbs and with timing of how you time the cabeza, then you can make a beautiful dish. I think that's an important dimension to understand when the two cuisines come together. It's a terrible place for us to have been.
Well, you speak of this, this resiliency and the creativity that cooks, embarked on, because they were, as you said, forced to make do with what was being discarded and things like that. And the creations that have come out of that, and the history that has come out of that, I think is quite fascinating. And the fact that you're covering it in such an interesting way, or such an important way, which most people don't know about, or don't know their history, or don't know the history of the region, I think is very important. I mean, I think something that's also important probably for us to differentiate, as you do in your writings, the difference between Texas Mexican food, what you mean by Texas Mexican food, and Tex-Mex food, because those are not the same things, correct?
Yes, thank you. We deal with this in our new film. The title of our new film is Truly Texas Mexican. And in fact, the first scene that takes us out of Houston is in San Antonio on the Riverwalk, and we talk about Tex-Mex. I would say that Tex-Mex and Texas Mexican cuisine differ in two ways. One is their history, and the second is their flavor profile. And I would say that to make a distinction does not disparage one or the other. It's simply to make a distinction. Tex-Mex is a food that was created by Anglos for Anglos in probably the early 1900s, 1950s. It begins to be very important around the 1960s and 1970s when food writers begin to write about it. And it's a food that is born in San Antonio when Mexican food of Texas was very popular. But the restaurateurs who wanted indoor restaurants, before indoor restaurants were present, we had outdoor fiestas with, it's called the Chili Queens. They're these ladies who are the original chefs of San Antonio in Texas. So there is no way to say this other than to say they wanted the Mexican food without the Mexicans. It's a sad thing to say, and it has to be said because in the film, we show an advertisement for Sweet Parlor of Sweets, and it says very clearly, we are selling original Mexican candy made by white people only. So you didn't want to, the racism was so strong, you didn't want to be dealing with the Mexicans. So this Palace of Sweets, which is in our film, by the way, we get all of the pictures from the University of Texas at San Antonio Library. They have a beautiful collection of historical documents. And this is one of them, the advertising that says, you can buy Mexican pecan candy made by white people only. So it begins that way. And then it becomes famous, and around the 60s or 70s, the food writers write about it and ignore the fact that it has indigenous roots. So nothing is known about our food, our home cooking that you grew up with, that I grew up with, that you just mentioned, the cow's head in the hole. Nothing is known about that. So the writing, if you read the writing in magazine journals who talk about food, they talk about Tex-Mex as though it were from the other side of the river, brought over, and we made it to our own liking, which is completely wrong. That's the worldview I was talking about. And it's very hard for people to get out of that worldview. So that's Tex-Mex. And of course, Texas Mexican it has a history which is 15,000 years old and doesn't have all that cheese. We use cheese, of course, yellow cheese. We started using yellow cheese during the Depression when, you remember the cheese relief that the government was giving out, relief cheese?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
We call it queso relief. Queso relief.
Yeah.
That's where the yellow cheese begins to come into our kitchens. The Mexican American kitchens is the yellow cheese.
I remember the blocks, the
block? Yeah.
Yeah, the big blocks I remember that as a child. Yeah, absolutely.
So this is part of our culinary history, how we moved from the white cheese, the Mexican cheese, to the yellow cheese. And of course, because again, that's all we had, the relief cheese. We made something beautiful, the cheese enchiladas and the nachos. But of course, we don't, I always say enough with the cheese.
There's a lot of cheese.
I like queso, chile con queso is actually Texas Mexican. We do it a little bit differently. But those would be the two differences that I would say. The history and the flavor profile is different.
It's different. You speak of, in your latest book, you speak of the art of cooking, the art of Texas Mexican cooking that is inherent to identity. In what ways does it tie people to their identity and memory and serve to foster the sense of community?
Thank you. Thank you. I'll give a very, very brief answer to a very big question and an important question. Memory, identity, community. I spoke for 50 minutes at the annual convention of the Texas Historical Commission this past January. They invited me to be the opening night keynote speaker, and that's what I wrote, that's what I spoke about. And the basic idea is that cooking really is memory, both cooking and eating. When you cook, you're reaching back and realizing how your ancestors dealt with their environment, how they dealt with resources at hand, how they interpreted them and used them. And then the sources of the food, including animals. And when you think about that, it implies a value system. What value system did they have towards their environment? How did they tend to it? How did they care for it? What is the value system that we inherit from them based on how they cooked and how they used the resources of the land? And then it has to do with identity, because when we cook, we narrate who we are. That's why cooks, home cooks that I write about, and in the film we interview mainly women, and they're home cooks, chefs, caterers, street vendors, and they all say, like this chef caterer in San Antonio, Rosalia Vargas, she's cooking and she says, "My mother is there, my grandmother is in these spices, I'm never far from home, and in the rituals of cooking, I'm never alone." This is the identity that she knows is tied to the origin of place. It situates you somewhere because it came from a definite place. And over time, they shape who we are, whom we have become. And this gets us to community, which is the relationships, whom we have become with the relationships that we have had. And so cooking is about community. It brings people together. In my book, I define cooking as an art form that is powerful and charged with the ability to affect social relationships, modify them. And so cooking is community because over time, it has always a cultural context. We eat not to survive, but to find a better way of surviving, which is relatedness. And how do we relate to the other? Ultimately, when we cook, your food is delicious because you understand differences. And that means you have a different way of accepting the other. You have more openness. You're open to change, to accept the other when you cook. And so that's community. And ultimately, we want to accept the other in a more open way. The other culturally, the other politically. And that's very important in Texas today because we're so divided in Texas. Well, in the country. And again, I keep referring to the film. The film talks about racism and all of these things, but ultimately, the answer to this, it seems to me, is that we're trying to cook a delicious, intellectually honest way so that we, by accepting the other, can prepare a table where all are welcome.
Wow.
That's what I...
Wow, thank you. I think that it explains it, kind of perfectly, the way that all of the, food plays this important role in how we live and how we communicate and how we associate with one another. You said something in your book that really stuck out to me, and I wrote it down several times. When you talk about these three, identity, community, and memory, you say renewing is remembering. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was really powerful because you touch upon the traditions that are inherited and things that you learn from, your parents and things like that. And I thought that was powerful in how you related to this kind of wider narrative that you're talking about with cooking and communication and bringing people together. And so I thought that was really, really interesting the way you did that. It was something that really stuck out within your work.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. The book, it was a challenge. The book really, I tried to say why food has the power that art has. And it took me a long time to really think about it and do it. But the bottom line was relying on the memory and the experience of my Mexican American community, the dispossessed, the poor, those people who from the outside are considered to be with no protagonist role of creativity, which is not the case. And it is from that perspective that then those who are out of the main power centers can say, we understand what that is. It is not, it is, the fight is not that it is now my turn to rule. The fight is that we've got to encounter each other in a different way. You know, the encounter where leads to war and fighting, those types of encounters are the kind of things that are dividing us today in our country. And I think food can call us to a new aesthetic that is based on social justice. When you cook, you are always about making something beautiful. And when you really remember the past, that it doesn't begin with your grandfather, your great-grandfather, it begins 15,000 years ago. Houston was here, populated in a very cosmopolitan way, navigating and communicating with central Mexico, Mesoamerica, all the way to St. Louis. St. Louis has mounds, has the pyramids that are like the pyramids in Mexico, because we were all communicated in this region. But so if you remember that far back, you know, really take all of history in, then we can understand our present better. How did North America come to be what it is today? Who are the immigrants? Who are the newcomers? How do we visualize that? And I think I come back to, we have a new encounter. And basically, I would say to cooks and to lovers of cooking who go to Rienzi House, and that is a beautiful space. You have a lot of probably jealous friends who envy your position there in that.
It's true. Yeah,
beautiful space. But that could be one of the meals, you know, dinner. And when you prepare a beautiful dinner, just think of this: so that you are involved in an artistic creation, and the basic beauty question to make beautiful food is, can you have beauty without justice? And you think about that, and it moves you to create a table that is beautiful because it is just.
Wow, that's I think an amazing way to kind of put it all and tie it together, all the things that we've discussed today. And I know that we could talk so much more about this. We've had several conversations leading up to this one. And so, you know, there's a lot more that we could talk about, but for the sake of time, we unfortunately cannot. But this has been really illuminating and informative. I'm sure, you know, there would be lots of questions. I have more questions about, you know, several of the things that we've touched on, but for the sake of time, I just want to thank you as we close things up here. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. And for those of you out there that would like to know more about Adan's work, please visit his website, adanmedrano.com, for information on his research, his upcoming projects, and of course, recipes. I look forward to your blog posts when you send out recipes. I'm constantly hungry reading your latest updates, which is great, being, you know, in lockdown. And I have, you know, your books on my table. And so I've been flipping through those to, you know, for, you know, recipes that are familiar, very familiar, that I grew up with, and then ones that are, you know, that you have, that have evolved, as you say, over time. So that's been quite interesting to see. So if you'd like more information, visit his website, and you'll get everything that you need to know there. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.